What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones. And coming up on today's episode, Phil Milani joins the show. We'll give our thoughts on Sunday's Super Bowl and look ahead to the Combine this year. All that and more coming up. Joining me here in the Broncos podcast studio for today's episode of Broncos Now is fellow team reporter Phil Milani. Phil, thanks for joining the show.
Sid,
welcome
always
back.
Good to be on. Thank you very much.
We missed you last week.
I know.
Of course, we had Eric on, but missed you as well.
Well, that's not as good.
Well, Phil, how are we doing? Have you recovered
Good.
from Super Bowl Sunday yet?
Yeah, what a crazy game.
I know. It really was. Slow in the beginning, but...
Broncos fans probably cheering for the 49ers, of course, but I think that at this point, I think it's okay to just kind of be resigned to the fact that, look, Patrick Mahomes is amazing, and let's just appreciate some of the amazing things that take place. I think with like any player like him who's really great, there's like a period of time where you're like, I hate this guy. They're not as good as everybody thinks they are.
Right.
Then at some point, you just kind of cross a threshold, and you're just like, all right, this guy's amazing.
He's amazing.
We're just gonna have to deal with this, and let's just appreciate what he's doing. I guess for what it is.
Yeah, you can't refute his ability at all.
Exactly. Yeah, and now I think it's kind of like similar thing happened with Nikola Jokic. I think in the NBA, where like people were like denying his greatness for a long, long time. Then he wins, the finals last year, and then you're like, okay, he's amazing, and let's just like accept it.
It's just what it is.
Same kind of thing. I think with Mahomes now, where now he's like clearly like. He's in the top 3, I think, of quarterbacks all time already.
Definitely.
He's only 28 years old, and the pairing of him and Andy Reid together seemed to be like a perfect marriage. So, I mean, it sucks that he plays for the Chiefs, but there's no denying the fact that he's amazing.
For sure, and it's fun to watch him play too.
Yeah, and it was like entertaining at the end.
It was,
so.
Yeah, it came down to the wire there.
I think the 49ers had some missed opportunities early, but
did it nearly kill you, Phil, to see John Elway hand the Lombardi off?
They did that. Yeah, why do they have to do that?
I think this is interesting.
I think it would be better for everybody involved if, like, they had a former legend from each team sort of on hand there to be able to deliver the trophy.
I agree.
Like, did you see at the beginning where they were doing some of the intros where like Jerry Rice did the video, Tony Gonzalez did the video? Similar thing, I think, to deliver the trophy. Because it might have been cool for John to be able to do that with the 49ers, and John Lynch was there, and their buddies and stuff. But
for the Chiefs,
oh my gosh. And I know Chiefs fans were relishing in that, and
I know Broncos fans were mad.
And it's just kind of that kind of sucked at the end there. I don't like that, but
I don't know that I like that
put
either.
John in an uncomfortable spot too. So whatever. I just all around. The second the game was over, I just turned off the TV. So
see, I like watching the trophy presentation and everything.
I just turned it. I turned it off.
Understandably though.
Yeah.
But Usher was great.
Usher was really good.
I give him
halftime was awesome. I thought
it really was.
Yeah, Alicia Keys with that piano was amazing. That was really
cool. Her
cool.
outfit.
Yeah.
Ludacris came on. So many people.
Definitely hit my demo, and I'm like, oh, am I getting old now?
No, I know all
the
of them.
halftime show is targeting me, but yes, I thought it was cool. I put on the roller skates. I thought it was cool.
I thought that was cool too. And the ground kind of moved with them too, so it was cool.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
I give it a solid 8.5 out of 10, I think.
Yeah, I thought
it
that
was
good.
really good.
I think people at first were like, oh, why Usher? Like, what is, he hasn't put anything out in a while.
Yeah.
But I was like, he's a great performer.
I think he's about to drop a new album here soon.
Yeah, or like a residency too in Vegas or something. So
I think you're right.
He's got to be like one of the top 5 dancers of all time too.
All time. He's a great performer.
He's an amazing dancer. So yeah, I thought the performance was really cool.
I thought so too. It was fun to watch, and I think that Super Bowl was the most ever, or the most televised event ever.
Yeah, most watched event.
Most watched.
I think in the U.S. it was only behind the moon landing in the U.S. So that's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah. Really,
good for CBS. Yeah, it was fun to watch. Well, Phil, looking back on the week prior to Sunday, we saw that head coach Sean Payton. He kind of made his rounds at Radio Row in Las Vegas. I know he was on Kay Adams' show, Up and Adams, too.
Oh, yeah.
Just talking about, talking about the offseason, talking about the draft, the combine, the free agency coming up, all of that. I know He talked about how draft meetings are starting here on Monday, which was yesterday, and just kind of gearing all that up, getting ready for all that. So.
I think that when the Super Bowl ends, it's kind of like, okay, that season, the 2023 season is over, like sort of officially now.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, anytime Sean talks to anybody, you're sort of paying attention to just see what he has to say. And this is going to be a busy offseason, I think, for the Broncos.
Yeah.
Fell short of their goal last year. So I think anytime you're in that situation, you're always saying, okay, there's going to be changes. You got to, make some moves here to get better. Certainly, all the attention this offseason is going to be on the quarterback position. But, this team has other things that they need to accomplish this offseason as well. And, the combine is coming up in a couple of weeks and they got to be prepared and get ready, to make sure that they make the most of that week there. Certainly interviewing players and knowing what you're looking for. And just, I think, having a better idea of what the goals are for this offseason. That's certainly underway now for the Broncos, and the college bowl games are all over,
Right.
and so now you can really start getting ready for the combine, and so much takes place that week. The whole NFL world sort of gathers in Indianapolis. They kind of gather at the Super Bowl location, and then, a couple of weeks later at the combine. So certainly going to be a busy offseason for the Broncos. Now as the past season is in the past, now you can turn all your sights to the combine and the draft and free agency. And it never stops.
It never stops. Yeah, I know there's been so much talk, so many rumors about whether the Broncos are going to trade up, trade back, if they're going to pick at 12. But, Sean was even asked about that too. And he said, hey, we're not getting swept up in all the talk.
Crazy,
I need to evaluate. I need to do my own evaluation first.
That always happens, especially with the quarterbacks during the draft process. Like these guys get talked about so much ad nauseum. And then all of a sudden, guys where you're like, say, for example, like Michael Penix, the Washington quarterback.
Right.
Like after the college football semifinal, people were saying, okay, he's not even going to make it through halfway through the first round.
Right.
Then he doesn't have the greatest championship game. And then after the Senior Bowl, now people are like, oh, he's certainly not a first rounder. So okay, he's still the same player. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So how did he
go
from
that to that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that you could just ride this wave and get caught up in it and just get a little bit out of control, I think. And I think for the Broncos, and having a guy like Sean, who's been in the league for so long, helps. Yeah. Having a guy like George Payton in there too with him. I mean, you could tell just by talking to George, he's just so level. He's not an emotional, up and down kind of a person. Right. So I think that's important, that you trust what your scouts have been doing all season. You trust the game film that you watch. You trust what you know in the meetings. And if you fall in love with a player during that time, I think it's important to stick to your convictions.
I agree.
And be like, no, I got to trust the people who are in my building, trust what I've seen, not get caught up in this wave, because especially the quarterbacks in the first round, people just go on this roller coaster and you could go crazy. I remember the year Baker Mayfield came out, all of a sudden he became the obvious number one choice.
Right.
When the whole lead up to the draft, it was Sam Darnold. So there's just all these kind of crazy moves, and I think you can get caught up in what the media is saying.
Definitely.
This team's trading up, this team's not trading up. I will say the thing that's exciting about Sean is that you never really know
that's true.
what he's going to do. You know, so much in the past with New Orleans, with the Saints, he's moved up. Last year, the Broncos moved up to take Marvin Mims. So with the Broncos sitting at 12, you're like, okay, if they really wanted to go up, they might be able to swing that. So nothing's ever off the table, I think.
True.
So it's just an exciting time, and especially with somebody like Sean, who likes to mix things up, add a little spice to the
keeps
mix.
Things interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of keeps everybody on their toes. But you can get caught up in too much of the media circus, I think.
I agree. Well, Phil, talking about the combine, I know it's only less than 2 weeks away at this point now, and I know you're going to be there in Indianapolis.
Oh yeah.
What are you most looking forward to?
Well, the NFL put out the list of, I think it's 321 invites.
Oh, yep, all the prospects.
So, I think that came out today, Sid.
Yeah.
So, there's going to be a lot of players there. I think that more than anything, though, the first day and a half of the combine, when all the GMs and all the coaches talk,
Right.
you learn some little tidbits here and there, what kind of decisions they're going to be making with regard to free agency. Little tidbits come out here and there. I'm always interested to learn about that, especially
Definitely.
teams like in key spots in the draft or with some big free agency moves coming up. I think that you're paying attention to see what other teams are saying, what your team is saying. I think Sean's going to meet the media there. George will meet the media. So you kind of learn some little things because it's the first official press conference they've had since the end of the season pressers.
Right.
So
Which was a month and a half ago.
yeah, exactly. So you kind of learn a little bit through that process.
Right.
And then I think for the teams, I don't know. It's always hard to know how much stock you put into what you're seeing out on the field.
Yeah.
People call it the underwear Olympics. They're just out there just playing against air.
Yeah.
They don't have it's not real
Right, it's
football.
not. Right.
And I always think the interesting thing for quarterbacks, some quarterbacks are I'm not throwing at the combine because they don't have the timing with the people who they're throwing to.
For sure.
It's sort of like a laboratory,
Right.
where some of them might say, okay, I'm going to wait until my pro day. I'm going to throw to receivers I'm comfortable with.
Which I think that's smart.
Smart.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, you might want a quarterback who's got that competitive spirit who says, I don't care who I'm throwing to. I can get the job done.
A very valid point.
I could go out there and I could sling it around. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Give me the football and I'll show up and I can play wherever, with whoever, whatever. So there's always a balance there of what do you do as a prospect, and then I think that the meeting rooms are so important because
Really important.
there's so much more that goes into being a good football player than just
sure.
Your 40 time or whatever.
Definitely.
I think fans get caught up in the 40 time a little bit too much. To me, as long as you hit the benchmarks for your position, as long as you're athletic enough.
Right.
If you're a good football player and you're athletic enough, then you're going to make it in this league. So
I agree.
I don't know how much stock you put into that, but I think the meeting times, it's hard because that even is such a controlled space too, where, okay, they've been working with their agents. Okay, if they ask you this is what you say. If they ask you this is what you do. But I think good teams can find a way to get the prospects off balance a little bit, and then you
Get
learn
them in
something.
their natural element.
Exactly. And somebody like Sean, too, I think is really good at that, where, I think that he can ask some good questions and then kind of just get them more comfortable, more relaxed, get to know them, the real player. And I think that part is important, too.
Yeah, I completely agree. Phil, you mentioned it earlier. NFL announced their list of prospects that are going to be at the Combine. Anyone specifically that you want to see, that you want to hear from him?
I think the first thing I always do is put in, okay, which buffs are going to be there? Only
fair.
one buff, Xavier Weaver, the wide receiver. Or Xavier Weaver. So that's my only buff there, Sid. So
that's kind of a bummer.
That'll change next year, I think.
I think so too.
That'll change next year. But so that's the first thing I do. And then I think, it's sort of set up for just see the quarterbacks.
All the
You know what I
quarterbacks,
mean?
for
I
sure.
think that's what you want to do. So see if they throw, if they don't throw, what their sort of what their goals are going to be there.
Yeah.
So, and then those top wide receivers in the draft. What are their 40 times going to be? What are they going to be able to do? And then I always think about the players who aren't invited. I tend to think, okay, gosh, there's definitely some
so
really
many
good football players who did not get invited to the Combine. Like I remember Philip Lindsay didn't get invited to the Combine. And, that just starts that process of developing that chip on your shoulder, and then they are like, okay, I'm going to go all out on my pro day.
Right.
So, I always think about those players who didn't get invited, and there's going to be a couple of guys who didn't make it that are going to be good NFL players. So
Absolutely.
that's what I sort of always think about it like that.
Yeah. Well, there's so much coming up, Phil.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to the Combine and the rest of the offseason here as it kicks off. Now that the end of the NFL season is officially over.
Yeah, most definitely. I think it's a time where there's a lot of buzz and what's going to happen with free agency. The NFL has really done an amazing job of making it a year-round
I
sport.
completely
and so,
agree.
combine in other sports is not a big deal, but it's a big deal for the NFL.
sure.
And then
Everything's a
free
big deal in the
agency and the
NFL.
draft, and it's just a lot of lead up. And I think for the Broncos, there's some big decisions that need to be made, and so players in the building. Free agents and draft, you heard Sean talk about that, just that this is the process where you got to evaluate all these different things. And especially when you fall short of your goal, I think the Broncos really wanted to make the playoffs last year. A lot of disappointment for the way that the season ended, especially after that 5-game winning streak. So I think that, when the season doesn't end the way you want it to, you're excited to get back to work and say, okay, let's get working on this. Let's get back to it to make next year better. So
before we know it, the players are going to be back in the building. Yeah. It always goes by so fast.
Yeah, exactly. So the process underway here.
Well, Phil, appreciate you joining the show today. Appreciate your insight.
Always fun.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Broncos Now. Broncos Country, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network in YouTube next week for another episode. We'll see you all then.